This will of course sound crazy, and I won't blame you if you think I'm deranged. But I promise you that everything I'm about to say is true, that the experience I went through really happened, and that the implications for the fate of the world should be seriously, gravely considered. I'm not even sure if there's a point in posting this. Who knows if anyone will actually read it, or if there's anything that could be done about it. I'm scared, really terrified of what it all means. But I'll share it with you, if only to unburden my mind somewhat of this terrible knowledge. In short, I have a suspicion, if not the certainty, that a lot of people in the world are the real-life equivalent of bots. That your neighbor, your mailman, your barber may just very well be biological machines, pre-programmed, living intricately scripted but nonetheless insincere lives. I'm not saying that we're living in a simulation, but the current population of the world, a figure that presently sits around 7 billion, isn't altogether real. That the number isn't entirely accurate on the amount of living, breathing, earnestly alive members of the human race. Much like a phone comes pre-installed with bloatware, hogging precious storage space, I think our planet's population has been falsified. I believe that the number of naturally born humans is much smaller than 7 billion. Maybe, and this is being generous, it sits at around half of that. Why do I believe this? Because I recently had an experience that I cannot explain. I can't reconcile with what I've been shown and told about how people behave, think, and exist, both within my own nation and culture and elsewhere. Earlier today, while waiting in line for coffee at a shop not far from my apartment, I happened to see a fairly attractive and smartly dressed woman walk through the shop's front door. I saw her holding her phone, up and a little bit away, obviously filming herself for social media. Not wanting to seem rude or be inadvertently drawn into the video, I looked away. The line moved on, and I eventually grabbed my order and sat at a table where I began reading a book I had bought earlier. The lady filming herself eventually placed her order, and after a few minutes, came to sit at the table next to me, still with her phone held out in front of her. I wasn't exactly annoyed. I had no reason to be. She wasn't talking loudly or interrupting anyone, but there was something unsettling about her behavior, something unnatural. Not just in the sense of walking around filming yourself. It's been contemporarily natural to do that for a while, but in the way she was doing it. Her behavior was very showy and almost theatrical. The way she was tilting her head, sipping her coffee, smiling, laughing, etc. It was all so uncanny. Halfway through my coffee, I spilled a little on my table and got up to grab some napkins. When I passed this self-filmer, I happened to glance at her screen, not really intending to be nosy, but curious as to which media platform she was using. What shocked me, what made me pause mid-stride and mentally skip a beat, was on her screen. Rather, what wasn't on it. The screen was black. There weren't any images, lines of text, or icons of any kind. This whole time, for at least 10 minutes, she had been broadcasting to no one. And even as I regained my composure and walked past her table in clear view of her, she was still behaving as if there was an audience, or some stream which the video was being fed. I sat down, perplexed and unsettled, though if you had asked me at the time, I wouldn't have been able to say why. Slipping an unused napkin in my book as a makeshift bookmark, I started to nonchalantly, or so I tried, watch them out of the corner of my eye, while occasionally sipping my coffee. I knew I wouldn't have been able to keep up the appearance of reading, so instead I went for absent-mindedness. And still, she continued to pantomime all the motions of streaming to an audience, showing every sip, every bite of cookie she had ordered, every cute and whimsical community-submitted painting on the wall behind her. It was eerie, watching her with the knowledge I had, and I found myself growing increasingly disturbed with each dishonest second. Finally, I had become so unreasonably creeped out by the disingenuous display that I leaned over and with a faint politeness asked her what her username was, saying that I thought I had seen her online before. In a gesture of maddening dishonesty, she held up her finger to the phone camera as if to say, "1 second," and leaned toward me. Our eyes met, and I immediately got a weird, vaguely primal feeling of fear. Not dissimilar to how you'd feel seeing a mask of someone's face that was, in all respects, realistic. except for one minor but glaring detail. Just as I was about to repeat my question, thinking that perhaps she hadn't heard me, she took a deep breath, smiled, and said, "You know the one, right?" Had she simply said, "You know the one," and left it at that, I would have assumed Instagram. I'm not too familiar with social media beyond entertainment forums, but whenever I hear about influencers, it's usually Instagram mentioned in relation. But the right? The definite inflection of a question piqued my curiosity and unsettled me a bit. The suggestion that she wasn't familiar with the platform she had been using for nearly 20 minutes set off some psychological alarm in my mind, one that bordered on a fight-or-flight response. Not wanting to cause a scene, really just wanting to get out of there, I nodded, forced a slight chuckle, and withdrew back to my seat. After an awkward and creepy moment of stillness, she did the same and went back to her fake streaming. I didn't bother to watch her anymore. I couldn't bring myself to turn back, and after a few more minutes, during which I tried and failed to recapture the interest I'd had in my book, I got up, threw my trash away, and left. As I walked home, I replayed the weird encounter in my head, and in doing so, only served to further frighten myself. There had been something so inexpressibly off about that person, and I wanted to see if I could find anyone else like that. Anyone who, for whatever reason, wasn't actually doing the activity they presented themselves as doing. I walked around town for a while aimlessly, trying to spot people superficially engaged in some activity. I saw countless people on their phones and tried with as much grace and stealth as possible to see whether or not they were actually doing anything on them. Not all of them were. That's right. I caught several people, 6 or 7 in a sample of dozens, who weren't actually texting, browsing feeds, or talking to people. Their screens were blank, not merely dimmed or locked, but blank, devoid of any interface and activity. Their fingers flicked and tapped, their faces smiled and grimaced, all prompted by, or in response to, nothing. They were like children playing pretend amidst crowds of other, genuine humans, wholly oblivious to their lies. And all of these people, like the person I'd witnessed in the coffee shop, were off in some way. Not outwardly creepy, but subtly, almost imperceptibly uncanny in their behaviors and expressions. Some displayed movements that were too practiced, devoid of any variation or style or personal touch. Others were the opposite end of the spectrum, too uncontrolled, too lax, jittery, or uncoordinated. Most people within a community adopt some basic standard of behavior. They exhibit, at least in public, the learned mannerisms and motions of a society. But none of the aforementioned people fell into this common behavioral middle ground. They were so different, in ways that you wouldn't notice unless you had consciously taken note of the behavior sometime before and then endeavored to seek it out and study it. I didn't confront any of these people. I was too creeped out, and honestly, too fearful to even think to approach them. I watched, observed, and eventually recoiled away from every single one. There was no specific race or age. Their races, sexes, fashion sense, and ages all varied, but they all had in common that strangeness about them, that, once you noticed it, unmistakable uncanniness. Had that been the end of things, I probably would have gone home and forced myself to forget about it with some dumb TV and junk food. But when I began making my way home, after having spent nearly an hour looking for these aberrant behaviors, I found myself face to face with another one. With my roommate. He approached me, said that he'd been waiting for me for nearly an hour. I then remembered that I had asked if he wanted to go see a movie with me after I had grabbed some coffee. In my odd experience and subsequent amateur investigation, I'd forgotten all about the plan. I apologized and gave the admittedly lame excuse that the coffee shop had been out of milk, even though I get my coffee black. He forgave me and asked if I'd still like to go catch a later showing, but even as he smiled and playfully nudged me, I saw in his face that same uncanniness, that now unmissable falseness of physiognomy. To test him, to see if he'd actually perform an activity or simply be fed the information by someone or something, I asked him to look up showtimes. By this point, my heart was racing, so to both appear casual and settle myself down, I got out my own phone and started randomly flicking through menus. He asked if I had a preference for the time, and I said no. Then, casually walking beside him, I angled my phone so that I could get a video of their screen, whilst not looking like I was trying to film him. A few seconds passed, and he then pocketed his phone and told me that he'd booked seats for us. I thanked him, and we went on our way. I started a conversation, something about our personal lives, and then casually checked the video I'd taken on my phone. When it finished, I watched it twice more, and then, with blood chilling in my veins, suddenly blurted out, "Shit, I have to go." In a way, it was a genuine statement. I wouldn't have been able to continue walking alongside him after having seen that video. In the video, his phone screen was blank. He hadn't looked up any movie times. Somehow, he had acquired the information or had entirely lied about it. He didn't say anything at first, and I didn't look back. I didn't want to see him feigning surprise. But just before I could round the corner, I heard him call out, "Okay, I'll meet you at the theater. You know the one, right?" In the exact same questioning inflection that the lady in the coffee shop had used. I've since moved out of my apartment. I didn't even give a reason. Packed up my belongings, called a close friend, one who thankfully doesn't exhibit any odd behavior beyond the usual quirks of an early millennial, and paid him a few bucks to help me move things in a hurry. I've since seen a handful more of them, those fake, unexplainably scripted people. There's something going on, or maybe it's always been like this. Maybe since the beginning of mankind, there have been genuine people, but also performers, mimics, doppelgangers, space fillers, human bloatware. I don't think that the internet is the only thing that's filled with bots. Hey everyone, thanks for watching tonight's video. The story was written by Weird Bryce Guy, and you can check out more of his work in the link down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help me grow the channel. It really helps. Let me know what you guys think and feel free to leave any feedback in the comments. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Good night.